Thanks for coming, everyone. We're very excited to welcome back to talk Whitney Armstrong. Whitney comes to us with a very prestigious career in data roles across a number of companies, including Yahoo, Indiegogo, and now at Upwork. She's also here for the technology conference. This is a joint session with the technology conference. I'll be sitting on the Women in Technology panel this evening. Hope you all make it for that. So look forward to a really fun. I love the title, Superpower Kryptonite. So please join me in welcoming Whitney Armstrong back to talk.
Thanks, Patrick. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm super happy to be here. I flew in from San Francisco yesterday, so the whole day of traveling, but absolutely worth it to be back here talking about data with you all. So just jumping into the theme of data as a superpower or kryptonite. So if you could choose any superpower in the whole world to have as your superpower, what would it be? There's no wrong answer. Data. That's a good one. We'll talk a little bit about that today. Any others? Flying. Invisible. So these are, this is actually a pretty common question, and we heard some of these answers from you all. Mine is actually teleportation. If I could have any superpower in the world, it would be teleportation. The idea that yesterday I could have just magically popped here to Hanover, pretty amazing. Spend this time with you all, and then in a moment be back at Upwork doing 2018 strategic planning, and then from there immediately home in time for dinner, bath, and bedtime with my son Zach. Sounds like a dream, right? There's also some downsides to having that as a superpower. So with teleportation, I was reminded yesterday, Patrick and I were just talking about this. I had 5.5 hours with nobody pinging me, no things demanding my time, so I got to choose how I used that. I could sleep, that would be a miracle. I could read a book, I could think about some long-term life goals, so you lose that with teleportation. You also lose just the context switching. I mentioned being immediately home with my son, but not having that transition time to really mentally and fully be there and be present. So we'll talk about both sides of superpowers. So no secret, you all are here today. Data is all over the business world these days. Everybody's talking about it, right? So data is a superpower. There's more of it than we've ever had before. So there's lots of great statistics about how much data is collected today. There's lots and lots of buzzwords about it, everything from artificial intelligence and machine learning. We're going to focus today on data as a tool for business intelligence and how we can make it a superpower. So, so get your cape, put it on, and fly. Magically, you've got your superpower. Unfortunately, this is a myth that happens a lot in the business world today for people, especially who don't really understand that data is complex. There's a lot that goes under the covers, and there's a lot of ways to get it wrong. So hence, data can be kryptonite. So we're going to talk about the ways that it can be kryptonite. So the first way is that, does this look familiar to anyone? This is what I call kryptonite type 1. Type 1 kryptonite is when someone is using data to deliberately mislead the audience. So for whatever purpose that is. Now I know all of you as part of the tech community would never do this intentionally, but the statement was that this was the largest inaugural attendance in history, period. So that makes data kryptonite for the user, for the person who's trying to be a superhero, because all of a sudden their credibility is completely shot. So this happens in business too, even with good intentions. So I do a lot of work on board presentations. There's a real desire to tell very positive stories to the board. You only want to highlight those charts that are up and to the right when you're talking to the board. If that's not what the data says, your data has just become kryptonite for you. So I would encourage you all to think about that and be mindful whether you're working on the story that you're telling to the board or you're working with business partners and being led down that direction to challenge that. Okay, the next way is around data integrity. I think, have you all talked about data integrity and what it means? Yes, no? Okay. So this is a quote, a pretty famous quote about integrity in general. What I say about data is data integrity is doing the right thing so no one else has to watch. So this is making sure that the foundation of data is solid and accurate and reliable so the people using it can trust it. So this is and it plays out in lots of different layers. I could give a 3-hour talk about data integrity. It is a common way that data becomes kryptonite in organizations. Again, it's not intentional, but with all of the data that we have in the world today, it can be really complicated to get good, clean information out. So it's in how data is collected and stored. It's what your data governance is around that. And then your data dictionary is one that we'll talk about extensively. So I'm a little dehydrated. Taking a deep breath. So this became kryptonite for me when I was at Indiegogo. So you look at things like data definitions and something that might seem obvious. So the definition of a new customer. Could you define a new customer for a business? Pretty straightforward. Yeah? Lots of nods. So at Indiegogo, I got one no. So at Indiegogo, the equivalent of a new customer was a new entrepreneur. So a new entrepreneur coming onto the platform trying to raise money. So Indiegogo has 2 different product offerings. One is a crowdfunding campaign, and the other is what they call an in-demand campaign. Just different dynamics to how those 2 things play out. Uh-oh. Did that work? Maybe. Okay, I'm just going to tell you about the new customers. Okay. So some groups, there it is. One group had defined a new entrepreneur as any new customer who was launching either a crowdfunding campaign or an in-demand campaign. So it was the sum total of those 2 things. Other groups were defining it as any customer who was new to Indiegogo, regardless of what product they brought. So this became kryptonite. You can see, I'm seeing some yes, the math doesn't work, right? And you would have these meetings where people were trying to make decisions based on how many new customers were being generated on a given marketing program, and it just didn't work. So you end up spending a lot of time and energy trying to figure out what's behind why those numbers are different. So that's data integrity in just one example. Again, there are lots of ways that data integrity can come up as an issue.
How did you resolve
Yeah, it's a great question. Can we talk about it
Absolutely.
when I get there? Because it's about how we turn data into a superpower.
Perfect.
Well,
Yeah.
when you say integrity, it actually makes it sound like there's a moral weight to it.
Mm-hmm.
So is that an issue of data consistency in the Indiegogo
So-
case, or is there really an integrity issue where different groups are trying to game the system?
So in that particular case, it was not a malicious trying to game the system, but there was a truth component to it because there was no clear definition that everybody understood a common language. So there was a truth and honesty component to it, but it was rooted in the data. It wasn't in an individual or a team having malicious intent or trying to game the system. Sometimes it will come up. The most common example is in sales organizations when they are trying to define how their quotas are determined, right? It makes sense, right? Their personal compensation is dependent on how their quotas are established and then how they're measured on the outcome. And so there's often a lot of discussion and debate about how those things are defined and calculated. And that falls into data integrity. So it's really about truthfulness and transparency and having the systems and infrastructure in place to maintain that. And an overarching thing that helps with data integrity is having clear data governance. And that can take very heavyweight forms in highly regulated industries to lighter touch forms. And I appreciate the question because the other part that was interesting about that Indiegogo example is I happen to work in industries and with companies that are changing rapidly. So the strategic focus changes, and products are added all the time. And so you have to have data that is nimble, but nimble with integrity. So as you add a new product, it's defined in the same way. Or if all of a sudden you could define a customer as just any new customer, but now that you've got a second product, you have to redefine it. So you need the systems in place so that when you do that changeover, the data can grow and evolve with. Make sense? Okay, so back to Kryptonite type 3. So Kryptonite type 3, and I promise this is the last one. Data's not all scary and bad. But these are important ones. And this is one actually where I believe that each one of you can bring your own superpowers. So this is in the strategic layer and bringing your business acumen to data. Because data is so voluminous these days and complicated, there can be a tendency to go super technical and forget about what we're really trying to achieve. So when I arrived at Indiegogo again, they had a set of KPIs or key performance indicators. They were the 3 metrics that they ran the business by. Okay, so very critical. They did annual planning by these metrics. They did quarterly planning. They set people's individual targets by these metrics. These metrics were the number of active campaigns on the platform, the average number of contributions per campaign, and the average contribution amount. So if you take those 3 things, those 3 metrics, the math works. So if you put a statistician on it, this is great, right? The math works. You multiply the number of active campaigns times the average number of contributions each one of those campaigns is getting. By the average size of those campaigns, you're going to get total funds raised, which is their direct driver of revenue. Awesome. So I get there, I'm handed these metrics as the head of data and insights, and we go through our first quarter, and we miss the funds raised number. And everybody's looking at me saying, well, why? Well, the average number of contributions per campaign was below that was in the plan and in the target. So what do we do about that? Well, why did that happen? And there's no clear answers to that. There's a number of reasons. Number one is that's a rate between 2 factors on the platform, the contributions coming in and the number of active campaigns. The second is that nobody in the organization owns that metric. If you tell the sales organization to go raise the average number of contributions per campaign, what are they going to do about it? If you tell the product team to do it, what are they going to do about it? And then the third, and this is the most important and a big sort of aha moment for me, was if somebody does do something about it, so say product has this genius idea, well, we're just gonna funnel all the traffic to the campaigns that are getting the most contributions, and that's gonna lift our average contribution number. Well, you could then ultimately hurt the business. You might ultimately drive down revenue by moving that particular KPI. So for me, this was really perplexing. Like, here's this business running on these KPIs, everything is built around it, the whole infrastructure is built around it, and they don't make sense, and frankly, they're kryptonite. So really scary stuff. So I would say, trust your intuition. You all are super smart business people. If you see something that doesn't smell right or is confusing to you, ask questions and bring that part of that superpower that each one of you has to data rather than taking it at face value and accepting it for where it is. Okay. That's kryptonite. Any other kryptonite questions? No? Oh, yeah.
A lot of what you talked about earlier was like the structuring and having sort of the infrastructure and how things are changing, making sure you have the right governance.
Mm-hmm.
How do you and without that, the data is kryptonite. How do you ensure that people care about those governance things? That was one of the biggest struggles that we had, is people were like, the underlying data does have issues, but we're not investing in creating that governance, which then leads to trust issues all down the line.
Yeah. So it's a wonderful question and something that has been at the core of a lot of my career path, and frankly is why I have then subsequently been recruited to fix this very issue. Because data governance, it's not the fun part. It's not the shiny part, but it is critical. So to be able to articulate the business value of it, so I'm using a fun metaphor of it being kryptonite, but to explain that, you know, these are not small investments that companies are making in data, and they're really making them to no value and actually negative value if they don't have sound governance in place. There's also one of the great things about where we are with technology today is that governance can be very lightweight to end users. So what I have done is had our centralized team that is responsible for data governance, and to make it very invisible to the end users. Now, the powers that be need to understand the importance and investing in it and the critical nature of it and the value to the business. So, and I'd be happy to talk more about it. It's one of those things I'm like, okay, I know you guys don't want to hear this, but we got to talk about data governance. Yeah. So send them off to a board meeting with bad data once, and they'll learn really quickly. I don't recommend doing that. That was, I think you all got the joke. Okay. So so this was all about framing and those KPIs and how critical it is, not just how you define metrics, but what metrics you choose to focus on and tell your data stories with. So once we're past kryptonite, we get to humanity. So most of us spend most of our time not actually wearing our golden cuffs and exercising our superpowers, and we need data as part of getting through day to day, and it's very important and valuable and helps us in everything else. So this is where things like reporting come in, dashboards. I'll just say a few things about dashboards. The term, it drives me nuts because it used to mean this. It used to mean the 3 to 5 metrics that you needed to check in on the business. I was working with a new BI platform, business intelligence platform, where there were dashboards, and they were, I can't even tell you how many times you had to scroll and the number of charts that were on them, which is totally useless and a waste of everybody's time and a waste of companies' resources. So I partnered up with a business partner who was responsible for design and used Net Promoter Score data, and she had a dashboard. So we said, okay, we're going to dive in on this one and use it as the shining example for the company about how to use dashboards effectively. So we printed the whole dang thing out and laid it end to end. and it was taller than me. So how anybody uses that, I mean, we have so much going on and so many things that we need to do in our lives in general, but in our roles as professionals. So to also have to comb through all of that to try to figure out what's the information that you need to be addressing. So if you see that, put a stop to it. Again, put on those business hats and say, okay, what are the 3 things that we need to check in on every day to make sure that we're within the speed limit, sort of, and not running out of gas. The other thing about data that happens in the general humanity walking around is that we have data groups, we have analysts and people out in various business functions who lob data requests into data organizations. Can you send me XYZ by XYZ over this time period? And it goes into a queue, somebody writes a query, sends you some raw data. This is how it was at Yahoo. This is actually how I ended up in the world of data and analytics. I was leading business operations for the media and entertainment business unit at Yahoo. And I needed data to do my job. And I couldn't get it. And here was this company at the time that was collecting more data than any other entity in the country. And I couldn't get my hands on it, and it drove me nuts. And when I did, it was like, okay, here's this flat file. I don't know, like, did I get the right stuff? There was no back and forth about it. So there's definitely an opportunity for improvement there. My perspective on that is that data analysts should be integrated with and collaborating with the business users of data. They bring great minds and questions about how to structure a particular piece of analysis. They can partner with you on the next generation dashboard. You can ask questions. So it's a really powerful collaboration between the 2 different functions. So I'd encourage you to think about that. If it's treated like a service organization, you're lobbing in requests, you're missing out on a lot of the value. Okay? I'm seeing a lot of heads. People have, yeah, question?
Question back on the dashboard.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever encountered where if you were going into a meeting with very senior leaders and you'd be wanting to show a very simplified dashboard with really just a couple of metrics, but you would get pushback from them saying, maybe this is not the complete story, I want 10 other metrics because that's how I'm used to things. Have you ever sort of tried to convince people to really move to a simpler dashboard?
Yeah. Yes and yes. So when I was at Yahoo, I was responsible for our quarterly business reviews. And actually, so we had these glorious presentations, and the CFO wanted the spreadsheet with literally hundreds of numbers on it. Like, I want you to go be the CFO. I don't want you combing through my spreadsheets. So that was really tough. So there's 2 things on that I did. So number 1 was I sent her my spreadsheet ahead of time so that it could be more of a discussion. If that's what she needed to feel comfortable, I did that. And then the other part is, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but thinking of data as a tool for telling stories as opposed to reporting. And that's really how you're going to get your audience, whether it's executives or product leaders or marketers or sales folks or potential partners, is if you think more about the story, what is the message that you're trying to tell, and you use the data to support that and inform it. Yeah?
So just to tag on, like, I empathize with your dashboard comments. I'm pretty sure my summer internship role was literally like build dashboards. But how do you tell a story if it's like a reoccurring like reporting? So you want to check in, let's say, every day and see how X and Y are doing. Like, I totally understand the story part if it's, you know, getting
if it's a
point across,
presentation.
Yeah. How do you do it on a reoccurring basis?
Yeah, so it's the same. So a dashboard is something that's live and lives without you, and somebody's just checking it. I frame it as, what are the questions that I bring? If I put myself in that end user's position, what are the things that they need to know every day about what's happening in their area of responsibility. So it's more about what the information is as opposed to the data. So, you know, I had the car dashboard, right? But it is, so the product team needs to know, are we seeing a big spike in new registrations? Are we seeing a big fall off in comment activity? So, you know, what are the 3 to 5 things that are going to change how somebody's going to spend their day? And what I have found in collaborating, that's why I really emphasize the collaborating part, is when you engage them in that discussion, they get more and more comfortable and then appreciative, and then the light goes on of, this is really what I need and this is really what's going to be helpful. I was just asking for all that other stuff because I didn't feel secure in it and I didn't trust that I was getting the information that I needed. So that becomes an iterative process that gets better over time. So it does take a leap of faith on their part, but if you can collaborate with them, it makes all the difference. Mm-hmm. I love these questions.
How is it not feasible to, I understand that you need to monitor a lot of metrics and there's a lot of drivers towards the health of your business.
Mm-hmm.
Is it not feasible to build an algorithm at the back end that captures a lot of that good data,
Mm-hmm.
and at the front end you have something very basic, like for example, like a credit score.
Mm-hmm.
A credit score has so much in the back end that
Yep.
you don't need to know everything in the back end, but
Yep.
it's very simple to digest on the front end.
Absolutely. As long as that algorithm on the back end isn't a black box, and folks understand and believe in the meaning of the credit score that comes out the other end. As long as that is clear, I think that is totally fine. And then depending on somebody's level of responsibility, and this is for the dashboards too, they can also be dynamic, that somebody can click in and drill down to different aspects and drivers and things, and that's a really powerful way to make it meaningful for everybody, regardless of their level or function or what they're doing in that particular moment. Like most days I might just need to be at that one number level, and then I'm doing a deep dive analysis and I need to be able to fill out the components of it.
Right. And is that something in practice, like in industry or?
So the credit score one is a great example of it. I went to a data conference where the head of data analytics for Pinterest said they have one number that the whole company is focused on. I think as long as that one number truly does capture, and if we move that one number, it will have the intended business result, I think it's fine, and it does happen. Where it can get a little dicey is that stuff that I was talking about with those KPIs. So I can move that number in a way that is offset by other things. So as long as everybody is clear and on board, and that the outcomes of moving that number are what you want the business outcomes to be, then it's definitely happening. Yeah.
So I really like the part you're mentioning that story is important and using data to support the story, but
Mm-hmm.
isn't it become easier to attempt to use this data as to fit into the story? Meaning like, oh, our share is growing versus a year ago, but apparently the versus quarter, our share is down, but people like try to hide that so that their scorecard looks good. So how, as a data governor, how would you drive the culture that use the right data usage?
Yeah, I mean, that is all part of those things that I went through about Kryptonite. So it's important to have that point of view about what the data is actually saying, so that when you're telling that story, that it is congruent with what's happening in the data. So, and depending on your role, so I mean, I don't play the role of police officer for people, but my role is to be responsible for the metrics definition, so that if something comes out of one of the analytics systems that I'm responsible for and somebody's using it in a presentation, then that's on me, right? If they're misusing it, I can pretty easily call that out and say, no, actually, that's not what the data says. There's a BI platform called Looker. Has anybody heard of Looker? Yeah. So I've worked very closely with them and talked with a couple of their customers, and their CEO actually mandated that nobody was to bring any data, whether it be in a presentation or a report, that didn't come out of Looker. So they were able to do all of their data governance and analytics governance in Looker, and then that became the source of truth in the company. Others? Okay. I love storytelling. That's an important one. Okay. So what have I done, and how can you guys turn data into a superpower? Are you guys ready to talk about that stuff? Yeah. Okay. So I watched Wonder Woman on the flight over. I hadn't had a chance to see it, and I'm like, oh, I got to get this in there. So let's move on to this. And I've shared with you a lot of the challenges and how data can be kryptonite, or it can just be part of your day-to-day and how humanity lives. So with data integrity, because we've talked a bit about that, and specifically the Indiegogo thing about having different definitions for customers. So what I did was I raised the awareness that there were all of these different definitions around the organization. So it was really critical that people understood that and understood why that was problematic for the company. And then I partnered with the data engineering team to say, okay, well, what do we do about this? Because I can write up a data dictionary that's stale the minute that it's published and not particularly useful. So we needed to have a solution that we could implement gradually, that we could govern and maintain, and that it would be seamless, and that as definitions were formed or updated, and that gets to the flexibility as the business was evolving, that it was immediately and easily applied to all of our reporting and analytics, so that you didn't have this lag of, well, I've got this spreadsheet over here and it has this number in it, or I've got this dashboard that says this number, which is what was happening. So this is actually where we did a number of things on the technical side. So on the data warehouse, we implemented a web-based data transformation tool so that our centralized analytics team could update definitions in tables in the data warehouse, and then implemented Looker, which has a modeling layer. So we were able to, in that modeling layer, write the definitions and then put in plain English what they all meant from a data perspective. So once it was in Looker, that was then our source of truth, and people could say, I want to know how many new entrepreneurs we have. Let's go see what the analytics team says. I don't know why I keep going to sleep. So all of those data definitions prior to that we talked about the big long dashboard, right? So big long dashboard was made up of a couple hundred different charts. They were all individual charts with SQL queries behind each one of them that were manually written. So, and many of them had the same metric, so new in-demand customers. And at the top of the dashboard, it would say, we had 117, and you got to the bottom of the dashboard, and it would say, we have 204. So, and in that infrastructure, if we wanted to clean up all of those definitions, you had to go through and find every one of those charts where that definition existed and copy and paste the SQL code into it. So we needed to have this data integrity, and for us it was core to have this dynamic, flexible data dictionary that was immediately applied to all of our metrics. And that had a huge lift in the amount of value that we as a company were getting out of data. So all of a sudden we had a superpower. It's awesome. Any questions about the data dictionary? We've talked a bit about it. Yeah?
So like I've gone through like data dictionaries where you know, one thing is referenced to another, which is referenced to another, which is also linked to this third thing. Is there the system that you guys implemented? Was it, I guess, like somehow like more dynamic, or like were those relationships easy to see, or how did you kind of help the analyst who might be using this information understand faster how everything is kind of connected?
Yeah, so there's, in the tool that we implemented called Looker, there is a part that is the data model explicitly where you define metrics. And so anybody can clearly go in there and see this metric, and here's how it's defined. And it's pretty close to basic English, though we always put a comment field in so it was actually plain English, and very clear how it was defined from a business user's perspective. And then for people who were more technically inclined, you could actually see the SQL behind it. So you could see what fields, what tables, how the math worked behind each metric.
Okay.
Yeah? Okay. And then if any of those changed, you changed it in that one place in the model, and it updated everywhere. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Looker if anybody wants to talk about that. So the next way to make sure that you're using data as a superpower and all of its power is to really focus on what is the value that you're getting out of it. So particularly in engineering companies, it's really common to focus on the technical details and how much data are we getting in, as opposed to what are we getting out of that data. So this is what I found at Yahoo when I was in my role as the business operations person, when I couldn't get the data. So I talked about it enough and complained about it enough to my coworkers, to the COO and president, and that was actually what launched me into data. They said, okay, if you've got all these ideas, go fix it yourself. So then I shifted from being a customer into to leading this transformation of the data group. And so I partnered with the head of data engineering and the head of data product management, and we wrote the first ever mission statement for the data group at Yahoo that was all focused around customers. So, and the value that we were delivering to customers. So we didn't care how big the database was. We didn't care that we were collecting more data than there was in the Library of Congress every day. What we cared about was, were we having an impact on the business? Were we delivering critical insights that were informing the strategic decisions of the executive team? Were we partnering with the sales organization? So that led to a whole shift in the way that group operated. And I would encourage you, if you want to use data as a superpower, think about what you're getting out of it. It's really easy, and for somebody like me, sort of fun to get into the technical details of it, and I could geek out all day long about it. But it's really about what business value are you driving. How are we doing? Oh, we are running out of time. Okay. So we're going to come back to those KPIs, because this, so reframing things. We talked about the KPIs. So anybody remember? Number of active campaigns, average number of contributions per campaign, and average contribution amount. So this was a big issue, and I needed to mount a change in order to make sure that data was actually a superpower for Indiegogo. So I did a lot of talking with stakeholders. The company had been living with these metrics for a long time, so I needed to understand why and what we really wanted to get out of them. And there was a lot of whiteboarding sessions and brainstorming about what we could do, and there was always this thing that, the math needed to work. And I sort of had this light bulb moment of, well, wait a minute, the math needs to work, but it doesn't need to be just one equation. And this gets a little bit back to your question about can it be one number. So the thing about Indiegogo is it's not an e-commerce business, it's a marketplace. So there's two different sides of the marketplace, and those metrics, we're trying to measure the whole marketplace and the dynamics of the whole marketplace, as opposed to looking at what's going on the supply side and what's going on the demand side. So we had zero clarity about what was truly happening. So went with two very simple key performance indicators for each side of the marketplace. So again, the number of active campaigns, but then what was the total funds raised per campaign? And if both of those are going up, great. If one's going up and one's going down, I don't know, is that okay? Well, you can multiply them together to find out and deep dive into those. And then the other side, there was no visibility into this before. The demand side, the people who actually bring money to the marketplace. So we said, how many contributors are coming to Indiegogo and how much are they contributing? Not how many contributions are each campaign getting, but let's talk about the actual people who are bringing money to the marketplace, the ones that are keeping our lights on. So that was a big shift for the company. And there was definitely a lot of talk to bring people along that journey. And we had to reshape everything from what we were reporting to the board to how we did annual planning. But all of a sudden, those KPIs became superpowers for the company. Okay. So bring your business intuition. Yeah.
So on the supply side, couldn't you have kept it on that dimension and said number of successful campaigns to
That's
fix
another
that
way.
problem?
That's another way, although number of successful campaigns is somewhat arbitrary because the entrepreneurs set their goal amount and they tend to game the system, as somebody else was asking about. So the goal and whether or not a campaign was successful is not as meaningful as just how much money did they raise.
So maybe percentage of campaign amount raised. So say you're like in the market for 50 million and you raise like 25.
Yes. Though ultimately what was important to Indiegogo was that you raised 25. They don't really care what your goal was because it's the actual money that comes onto the platform.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that you could use 50% as a number
Of successful campaigns. You could, and that would be one of the metrics under, if you looked at average funds raised by campaign, and then you went down and you said, okay, what was the how successful were they relative to their goal? That would be a sub-metric under that.
I'm just saying to keep it on the same side instead of like measuring two different KPIs. But
So it's still a supply side, right?
right, but just captured in the first dimension. Like it could be a multiplier, no?
It could be a multiplier on the supply side, yeah. It's another metric on the supply side. So those were just the two top level ones that we did planning and we set corporate level goals over, and then there could be sub metrics underneath that, and that would be one of them on the supply side. And the same is true on the demand side, right? If you're looking to grow a particular segment of contributors, that would be another, you could do segmentation underneath the number of contributors that are on the platform. Got it? Okay. And then I just wanted to touch one last time on, and talk a little bit more about telling the story with data. And what I mean by that, this is something that after just being a super geeky, get the numbers right for many, many years, I have a whole new appreciation for telling the story with data. And really, this is, we could use any metaphor, this is getting data as a superpower over, into the end zone. So it's the last mile. It is, if you're not telling stories, you're not having real impact, which means you're not really using data as a superpower. So this starts at the very beginning with what questions you're asking and making sure that the analysis is framed to answer those questions. That's really critical, and having that buy-in up front of, yeah, this is the strategic question we're facing, and yes, this analysis will guide us and help us make a decision, and then to tell that story in a way that makes sense to your audience, that is that has the intended outcome that you're looking for. So just really critical. We could talk forever about storytelling, but it's just it's ultimately having the impact and having the message of data rather than data for the sake of data. Okay. So I've talked about it quite a bit, all the people that I partner with in my role. It's not a lone person superpower, so you will need other superpowers with you. So it's definitely a team sport to leverage data as a superpower from the stakeholders to the engineering team. So that's super critical. So we have a few minutes left, and of course I'm happy to take any more questions that you all have. But it's, regardless of what you all choose to do in your career journeys, data is absolutely critical in what you do, and you need to understand it and understand when it's kryptonite and how to use it as a superpower. And bring your individual superpowers to data. So don't lose track of your business acumen, your critical thinking, your strategic analysis. Bring all of that. And so that's my little guy. He asks to be Super Zach and goes and puts his cape on and goes running down the hall. So thank you all. Any other questions? Yeah.
So as the data is more pervasive, so even these days sales managers, marketing managers are very close to the analysis or looking at the data.
Yeah.
But at other end, when I think of like machine learning or artificial intelligence, the technology develop much faster than people can understand on the everyday basis. So do you see any discrepancy between the needs is there, we want to look into data, but technology is growing much faster, so people don't understand what's going on or what other data scientists presents to you, so how to minimize the gap?
Yeah. So I really focus on fundamentals and business intelligence. I believe that there is an immense amount of power and a huge opportunity in things like artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I think it's so critical that we don't lose sight of our own intellectual abilities and perspectives and bringing that human point of view to things. So if we're not there shaping the strategic business questions, so I focus much more on data, analytics, reporting, storytelling, where I think AI and machine learning are really powerful is in data-driven products and that end of things. It can be also in competitive analysis and predicting where markets are going to go. But when I'm looking at the day-to-day running of the business, I focus very much on, and I don't think that they're contradictory. But one of the things, that's really exciting, and the growth and the pace of innovation in machine learning and AI can sometimes detract. So we're not the shiny new object anymore over here in business intelligence, but it creates so much business value that I think that they can be complementary. Yeah.
Kind of on the same path as machine learning and artificial intelligence, even if you scale back a little bit and you just talk about more simple modeling, like logistic regression and
absolutely
regression, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for those models to change and people not to understand how those are working. Is that part of what you view as data governance, or is there a modeling governance portion to this as well?
Well, so I consider modeling as part of what we do in the analytics world. In terms of the more advanced stuff that you're talking about, it is a part of this and absolutely where this function and field is going. That's where it's really critical because there is that risk of people not understanding it and it getting disconnected from business outcomes, that collaboration I talked about is even more important. So there can be a really close relationship between if it's a product direction that we're trying to inform, there's a really close communication and everybody's clear on what the intended outcomes are, and then leave it up to us math and engineering geeks to figure out what's under the hood of that. Yeah.
I'm curious how important from what you've seen is executive direction and support in driving these initiatives forward, and also aligning kind of like for multinational companies, aligning the different teams that might look at different KPIs and different metrics. So how important is executive direction for getting everyone on the same page? And then are there things that you can do from a data analytics team to kind of, gain that support yourself? I think you mentioned through storytelling, but is there anything else that you can do?
Yeah, so it's absolutely critical to have executive, not just buy-in, but championing for this. The vast majority of execs that I work with have an appreciation for, but need to understand more than anything what the investment is required to do it right. Because there's why is this so hard? And one of the things that we do as data analysts is we make it all look super easy, which is our own, we have a tendency to put our heads down and just get stuff done. So creating visibility for what goes into making data a superpower is critical for the execs to have that context. And then the multinational, it's an interesting thing because it really depends on the organization. So I worked with Gap in building their first master data management system across all of their brands, markets, and channels, which was a feat. And there was a lot of discussion about, are we going to define an item the same way across all of those different dimensions? And from the top, they said, yes, we absolutely need to, and here's why. And they understood the impact and implications of that. There are other businesses where it's not worth the investment, so you really do have to do a cost benefit or an ROI for saying, you know what, we're going to let Asia run on those metrics, as long as we understand how they all work together to ultimately get to corporate value, but to have by region different metrics can be okay depending on the nature of the business. Awesome.
Whitney, on behalf of the Center for Digital Strategies and the Technology Club here at Tuck, we want to thank you for joining us today. We will thank you for you.
Thank you.
That's great.
Thanks so much. I hope that was helpful.